Hello, it is the top of the hour. This is the SIG release meeting that rarely happens. Welcome, thank you for coming. As with all of our community meetings, this is a recorded meeting. I will get it posted up onto YouTube just after the meeting, hopefully. Dropping a link for those who've joined into the chat for the agenda and minutes. Probably if you're here, you already know where that document is because it's the main place where the Zoom link exists. I'm gonna give it just another minute or two to see if we get some additional folks. I know we aren't gonna have Stephen Augustus today. I think he's traveling. I started jotting names of folks in the minutes just with the first people who had joined, but others, if you could add your name there, would greatly appreciate that for the record. I'll give it just another minute for folks to join. Well, we are at 2 past, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. One thing I know that some other SIG meetings do often is give a moment up front for intros for new folks, and I do see that there's somebody new on the call. Hart, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Hart Hoover. I'm from Heptio. I'm joining SIG Release to act as a shadow with the 1.14 release. So I thought I'd come hang out.
Right on.
I guess I should
Cool.
say VMware soon, but yeah.
Welcome to the team in both regards as a VMware person. So I guess that maybe goes then naturally to the first thing on the agenda. Updates to the SIG leadership. There is a reference there to a poll. Jace has moved on to emeritus status for the SIG, and Stephen Augustus and I'm Tim Pepper, I work for VMware. We are stepping up to contribute as chairs also for the SIG. So just FYI, if folks hadn't seen that go by in PRs or discussion in the Slack channel or wherever additionally else surprise, that happened. So yeah, hopefully this will just be a continuation of things. I do know over the last year, both Caleb and Jace have been pulled away quite a bit to other things. So Steve and I are hoping to make sure that we have meetings a little more regularly. The SIG has always struggled a bit. Almost everybody on the call today is either on the current release team or was very recently or like Hart looking to join. So the release team in any given quarter has really dominated what the SIG does. But I really believe that having a regular SIG meeting, documenting the things that we would like to do, that makes it easier for folks to show up, listen a little bit, lurk, see like, hey, could I do that? Read the docs, plans, thoughts, issues that we'd like to do, and see if we can actually get a little bit more going, because there's a lot of things the SIG has talked about wanting to do. And of course, it's always come down to resources, but then also a lot of things aren't well defined. And I feel like the release team has done a really good job of better defining roles, making it easier for people to step up and having sort of that shadow lead support structure that makes it more viable. So I'm hoping that we can pull in some more blood in SIG release and get some more things going on around release engineering as 2019 slams us in the face here in a couple of weeks. So next on the agenda is charter. Links there again in the minutes. That has merged. Hopefully folks have read it. If not, I would encourage you to. And as much as we just went through the whole process of getting it merged, I do think these charters need to be living documents. So if you see things, whether today or 12 months from now or whatever, think about PRing a change, bring it up in this forum to discuss, and let's make sure that we're constantly doing what we say and saying what we do, because that's part of the transparency that makes the group more sustainable.
So on that note, I was one of the steering committee members who had to review the charter prior to it getting merged. And since it had been hanging out for so long, I had a number of comments I would like to see addressed, but I didn't suggest they were blocking comments. I've left them all on the PR that's linked there. My question is how best to make sure that this is followed up. Should I create an issue and assign it to you and Stephen as the chairs of this SIG? Or how would you recommend I go about that?
I think that's reasonable. Otherwise, we pull up the first bit of the page and we see merged and our eyeballs move along.
Right.
So yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, the main thing was there was a lack of clarity. It's kind of implied, I think, that this team has historically only dealt with Kubernetes, but there are 138 different repositories associated with this project, and I think it's really important that you clarify which ones you are and are not responsible for. This will become especially important as we look to start building a release made up of things that are potentially built from other repositories when we do things like break out the cloud controller manager and sundry cloud provider implementations. So that's not the state of today, but you'll want to make sure you get that documented.
It's already, I mean, the last few releases, I think in 1.9 or 1.10, we did sort of a scavenger hunt to see what our dependencies were to note in the changelog. And it was like 10 or 12 things that hit the changelog. And then that doubled in the next one, and it doubled in the next one, and it doubled in the next one. And it's starting to look a lot like a distribution. And we really got to start thinking about what that means and where all we're pulling from and how we manage version skew, integration, testing, and make sure that we actually have something coherent. Because it's not just an academic exercise to sort of declare release. That has to actually be usable in a meaningful way. And integration is really hard. Was that the only thing, or were there? It sounded like there were a couple.
There were a couple. We don't need to go over them here.
Okay, yeah, and we can track on the issue and iterate. Any questions in the group there? Any other things that people maybe wanted to see in the charter, but were sort of similarly just like, let's get it in and iterate? Okay. Well, we will hopefully continue to iterate and improve that as time goes by. The next thing that Stephen put on the agenda was to talk about sub-projects and work groups. I think there's basically nothing there specifically to talk about this week. We do have a separate item for the release team for the 114 team. The LTS working group was sort of sponsored by the SIG and is going through its formation throes as well. A lot of conversation around that. Release engineering and PST, like PST is kind of an oddball, like in terms of ingesting disclosures of issues. That documentation is sat under K SIG Release, which is a strange, less than discoverable place for it. But then over in K Community, we have SIGs and working groups and don't quite have the other committee-ish sorts of things. And I feel like security and security disclosure has been more of a committee, but yeah, the governance starts to get fuzzy and where you put documentation there. I don't know, I think we need to improve that, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of specific work happening there.
My advice would be to poke Brandon on that. I think he's historically been the most active member of the project security team, whatever it's called. Mm-hmm. And he can probably steward that along, because I do agree committee maybe sounds better.
Yeah, just the basic naming of what the thing is, where it falls in the governance hierarchy, and how you know that it exists. It's kind of buried right now. And for the listeners, that's Brandon Phillips, not one of the other potential ones. Jordan Liggett also is active there, and we'll circle back maybe to his name in just a moment on one of the next things on the agenda. So kind of going back to what I mentioned, talking about leadership, my hope is that is the coming year goes by that these ideas of subprojects and working groups that relate to SIG release, that we better define what we want those to be, because there's been a lot of talk about it, but then that hasn't translated into specific actions, trying to get volunteers staffed behind them, and then we just end up talking month after month kind of ambiguously. So my hope is that we do better definition on that and can turn it into actual action. Next thing on the agenda, Stephen again dropped in a mention of this issue 321 and SIG release. I thought this was kind of dead and done and closed, but he felt like it wasn't, so he wanted to circle back to it. So the general gist of this is, right now the release process for 2/3 of the release cycle is kind of ambiguous. Anything that is merge ready can merge. When we hit code slush and code freeze, we have some established criteria that's more rigorous there, but initially it's fairly weak. And the idea of specifically annotating each issue and PR with a milestone, we'd done that in the past, but it didn't really amount to much of anything useful. And I don't think anybody, aside a little bit from some of the PMs, was interested in keeping it. We did away with it. We haven't seen that I've heard any adverse consequences, but Aish, do you have any thoughts from the current release cycle on that?
I would concur to say that I don't see how it can really help, mainly because when we kind of move something out of the 113 or whatever the current milestone, we safely always say milestone future, or we put it on some future milestone. It's even going to be, in fact, a little bit burdensome on the current release team to even figure out which appropriate milestone we should move it to, and all of that, if we tie PRs and everything to a specific milestone that we should get into. And yeah, from the experience that I've had this time, I don't think I would have benefited. Initially, it did seem like, oh, what are all the things that will merge in 113? That seemed to be like a big question, but yeah, you're right. Once we near code slush, I think that's when code slush and code freeze is when things start to solidify much more.
I can see the desire from a PM sort of perspective to have like a more deterministic managed flow, but that's also different than how this community works, and quite commonly most open source communities. So I don't know that that we should be declaring that that's what we're going to do, especially when people it felt like it kind of opted out of it. It was spotty how much things were marked, and going to enforcing without a solid rationale, I think there'd be a lot of resistance.
It's actually more of a tracking problem. So why don't we treat it as a tracking problem? That is, before code slush, if something merges, why don't we automatically apply the milestone to it at merge time?
But at the same time, you can already tell what merged in between two tags in Git.
Yeah.
And our Git commits, because they're automated, they're well structured, and you can find the associated PR numbers. I mean, this is something that you can do completely mechanically today.
There's even a GitHub URI you can hit, or there's a Git command you can use to ask which tag contains a given commit. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about this at length. I don't want to spend too much time revisiting it, other than to say I think it's undue friction. The only way I would see this as acceptable is if there was some piece of automation turned on that automatically applied the current in development release milestone to PRs going in by default, so that humans don't have to do additional work, but there's still administrivia of when you have that turned on versus when you have it turned off during development, which is no different than paying attention to it versus not paying attention to it during our development lifecycle. The only reason I think it would be useful is you could get a rough approximation of how many different pull requests have gone into a release at any given time, and try and chart, relatively speaking, where you are in relation to other releases. But again, I'm pretty sure you can do that without milestones, so I don't see any additional value. I don't know, Stephen's like referencing that, no, we actually decided we were for this, and I can't find a link to the discussion or document that says like where we decided to revisit this and say, yeah, actually it is worth the friction.
Yeah, well, there was there was talk about needing to do it because of Tide, but if that's not the case,
No, we don't. No.
so I think that may be where somebody got the idea that had been decided, because early on when we were deploying Tide, there was a discussion that all PRs would need to have a milestone before merging, regardless of cycle, but that turned out not to actually be how it works.
Well, I'll try to summarize this discussion then in the issue, and I don't know, I guess I'll leave it to Stephen to decide and close if he's okay with that, or if there was something more specific there, we can try and circle back to it. The next one, issue 320, what qualifies for a milestone? Now, this one I think is a little more interesting for a couple of reasons. One, things going to prior milestones, we need to be actually rigorous about, and that isn't particularly documented, the criteria, the technical criteria. And then I know as release lead, I experienced, Aisha's experiencing, Josh, you experienced, like, does this thing have to go in this week? And then you get some back and forth on, well, what if we get our test green by tomorrow? I mean, the day after tomorrow, and well, code freezes tomorrow. Well, all these sort of back and forths where we've kind of been process light and affiliative in the process, and things have mostly worked, but there's starting to be things that are a little more contentious, and it's a burden, I think, on the release lead to not have a more objective criteria to back to say, like, here's what I'm making my decision based on. There's always the gut, like, okay, this major feature isn't ready, and SIG architecture agrees, and SIG release agrees. We're gonna not do it right now. We're gonna defer until we have a better plan. But I don't know. What are people's thoughts?
Isn't that what code freeze criteria kind of helps with? I'm not sure what the specific issue.
But there, I think,
code freeze criteria.
so not to pick on the specific issue of the week, but let's say SIG Windows all agreed this is critical urgent. They label it as such, and it merges.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the right thing to do? So the release team does largely rely on the SIGs to make the right call, but when something's a little broader and we're worried about the overall health because we have to worry about that broader picture, I can understand also then where SIG Windows says, like, this feels arbitrary. I keep getting kicked from meeting to meeting with new requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So our main criteria is CI signal stability to keep things green, and this could be documented.
That's one of them, but also coverage, meaningful coverage matters as well. You can have green, I mean, stable signal is better than flaky signal, but stable signal doesn't indicate quality in itself.
And also that signal is kind of reactive for the most part. You get that after things kind of merge. Most of this, the decision has to comes to like, before do we even let it in or not? I think the criteria also is very time bound, as in like when in the cycle we are talking about. Is it like post code freeze or like few days before code freeze? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there, go ahead, Aaron.
This came out of a PR that was about cherry picks. It's weird how we're talking about milestones in general for everything. It seems like I want to separate the two things real quickly. So there's, should we be applying milestones to branches for cherry picking? And then there's the, what is our gate for inclusion into a release? Like what is the bar for a PR to land in a release? I feel like part of that has been sufficiently expressed by all the sundry labels that we require to go in on pull requests, like the priority, critical, urgent, right? And then the use of the milestone is to encourage a more subjective conversation between the SIG leads, who presumably have the subject matter expertise to understand why it is critical or important that this feature go in, versus the release leads, who have concerns with regard to stability, reliability, and quality. So I think you could certainly document your SIG release and expectations, but I'm not sure that you can necessarily document all of the criteria for SIG leads. Like there does need to be some room for discussion at the end of the day.
Yeah, there needs to be some flexibility between letting things in and having rigid requirements, and some guidelines overall to guide the process with a proper discussion when needed.
Yeah, so I don't want to blow scope because there's the larger idea of trying to say moving to some shiny new world where the development of larger features is done on branches that don't even touch master until they've met certain objective measurable criteria such as testability and reliability and performance and blah, blah, blah. But that is the future, and that has some engineering effort that needs to happen before we can get there. And so in the meantime, you could still at least say, like, in a way, like the release team have some metrics that you're using to track whether or not a release is ready to go out the door. And your criteria for whether or not a PR is allowed to go in or not is whether or not you suspect it is going to affect those metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think a PR is going to cause a bunch more tests to fail, you don't want that PR to go in. But that's all kind of like really difficult hand-wavy stuff to measure.
Yeah, that's true.
So maybe to back up a step, I mean, sure, this issue exists, talking specifically about the 320 issue, what qualifies for a milestone, not just the mechanism portion or the requirement to have a milestone. What qualifies for a milestone? Do folks feel like we really have a problem? I feel like, I mean, certainly this last week, there's been some frustration. But at any point, you're going to sort of have some misses on things. I feel like this pragmatic process light, drive a discussion with the SIGs and stakeholders is actually working.
Yeah, I agree. It's it can be agreed between CI stability and how critical a PR is in to get in, or if it can be on a patch post-release, etc.
I haven't watched PR since 1.11, so I would like to hear from the 1.12 and current release cycle people. But both for 1.11 and 1.10 cycles, my experience was we would basically have one team each release who would abuse code freeze by trying to get stuff in that was basically new feature development during code freeze, but only one.
Is it a specific team you don't want to name, or you're saying there was a
no?
different
It was different. It was different each time.
Okay.
In one case, it was honestly that they had not been paying any attention to the release cycle. Like it wasn't they were trying to push something in during code freeze. It was they were completely oblivious about where we were in the release cycle. Which now that we're branching at the beginning of code slush would be less of an issue. And the second time they said that's what they did, but I know for a fact that they knew where we were and they were just behind schedule and trying to push something in anyway.
In 1.12, I think I had it fairly easy. There were a couple that I'd been watching from the beginning and sort of started to, I kind of had like a red, yellow, green mental flash on each of the features that were supposed to be targeted for the milestone. And of those, as time went by and they were continuing to look late, then I'd ping the SIG like, hey, are you still working on this for the milestone? Yeah. Okay, another week goes by, still haven't seen code, haven't seen docs, haven't seen tests. Are you still working on it? Well, it's starting to become a stretch. And then finally, like, hey, you got to make a call. And they, in each case in 1.12, I think they all said, this isn't going to make it. So there were some that were a challenge, but there wasn't disappointment. Aish, I know you had that this time.
Yeah, it's similar. For the most part, SIGs and the owners are pretty open to these discussions from what I've seen. Similar to what experience you're saying, like generally we had to go, but we have to ping their enhancements multiple times. But finally, when they had to make a go, no-go call, a lot of them did a no-go call just because they were not going to make it in time. And during freeze, at least now, mostly the fixes I'm seeing are for their bug fixes, rather for features that are either going to GA. There are a few issues that they are finding as they're testing now. And those things that we are letting go by mainly because they are bug fixes and they're not feature work. The most part, yeah, even when there's a pending PR that's going in, and if we ask them if how critical is it, does it need to go during freeze, they're mostly there on the side of caution and say it's not needed if it's not super critical or if it's not affecting the stability.
Yeah, and that was when we changed how the milestones were handled to require fewer labels. That was on the basis that, hey, almost everyone is well behaved most of the time. And why add extra process for people to handle the handful of exceptions? And I haven't seen any reason to contradict that decision.
I'm in favor of keeping it light.
Well, I think that we can continue to iterate on our docs, at least in terms of the role handbooks and the overall project documentation of what the release process looks like. I was amazed as release lead the number of times I had to explain to a SIG lead where we were in the release process, or even what the release process looks like. And last week at KubeCon, I was presenting that and was surprised at some of the people who were asking me questions that I would have thought like everybody knows this. So I think communication and documentation can help. And I also am biased here towards a process light. I feel like things are working okay.
Gotta admit, I'm curious where they're looking that you're not broadcasting that info.
KDev, Kubernetes SIG leads mailing list, their own SIG Slack channel. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're clearly not
Busy.
looking at any of those places. Come on, where's the really obvious place you should have known to be sending that info to?
I don't know. There's a thread on the Contribex list, I think it is right now, around communication.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. Don't mind my trolling here. I'm going to stop.
Yeah. Contribex will be discussing this tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know how it's even possible to get information out to everybody that they'll read.
Yeah, this cycle we have really over communicated, but still, yeah.
But still.
I set up a post-receive Git hook that like shoots some text back to their terminal anytime they push a commit. Warning, you are at this phase of the release lifecycle.
We need like some little USB Wi-Fi LED something to send out to all the SIG leads that like starts out green and turns yellow, starts strobing red on their desktop or something. There was actually, so in all seriousness, there was talk of, at the point we have a better contributor website, of having some summary information in a little header like CI is awesome and green, CI is not looking good, where are we in the release phase, just some little sort of minimal visual dashboard of what's what at the moment.
Step one, find a place that everybody looks at. Step two, tell them that that's the place to look. Step three, put information there. Step four, have people start ignoring it because they say there's too much information. Step five, repeat.
Yes.
There's a place that everyone gets all their information from.
It's supposed to be KDev.
But apparently not.
And it's,
Yeah, for
it gets
anything
a
that
low
affects
volume
all
traffic.
Kubernetes developers, I send to the mailing list called Kubernetes Developer.
Yeah, and that's a low traffic. I mean, if you put that going to your inbox, that you're not getting a lot of email there, frankly.
Just use
all
Twitter.
right.
That seems to be where everyone in the tech industry is.
Yeah,
maybe.
that's not noisy at all.
Echo, 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 echo.
Okay, we're far
Yeah,
afield. Sorry about that.
Next up then, I've jotted some notes on the discussion there. I guess it maybe can go over into GitHub, but so I'd mentioned Jordan Liggett with respect to PST, the project security team. And then also the working group LTS. So Jordan is engaged in the discussions around LTS. And one of the very first things that we're talking about is like S in LTS is support. What is support? And we used to have, and I swear it used to be there in K community or somewhere, a thing that said like, we support 3 releases for 9 months with critical bug fix backports. And things have shifted around and moved, and that's really not clear actually today what our support stance is. So a lot of people have a sense of it, but Jordan's opened a PR there to at least clarify the version SKUs and upgrade portion of what we do today. Trying to keep it scoped, not going into any discussion of LTS or not LTS, just what do we do today? And does that include downgrade? Is it just upgrade? What are the version SKUs? Because part of understanding how to do better is understanding where we are today and getting people to understand that. And people don't understand it, not surprisingly, because it's not well documented. So I'd really encourage folks to check out that PR and kind of think about it and whether there's things that they would like to see there. I guess any comments or thoughts? This is more sort of just like FYI, check out that PR.
I will check out that PR. I linked in the chat the doc you're probably thinking of that references the 3 minus things. It's some deep URI that lives in a design proposals directory. How on earth does that sound authoritative? But it's the one that I have been linked, and I provide as a link anytime this thing comes up. So I am happy that Jordan is surfacing it. There's really a key line in there that took me a while to parse in the context of conformance tests, where there's like n-1 compatibility for clients and then n+or-1 compatibility for the API server to nodes to allow you to upgrade forwards and backwards. And so it's that API server +or-1 that I think actually translates into 3 versions for what it's worth.
Yeah.
So that's like, when I initially read that, I thought that meant conformance tests needed to be backwards compatible by 2 versions. It turns out they only need to be backwards compatible by 1 because of the client expectations. So like, there is no way I should be allowed to use kubectl from Kubernetes 1.10 against a 1.12 cluster. That is not supported according to our version SKU policy.
The other link too that kind of gets into a bit of this is the deprecation policy.
Yes, that's been pretty substantial around APIs, but not around the rest.
Mm-hmm. And then this, I guess, like on the one hand, maybe some of the folks on the call might be wondering why we're talking about this here. It really ends up impacting the release team quarter to quarter because we have to track these component SKU questions in test automation and make sure that they're actually testing what's intended. And then they very often break and people are like, do we support that? We don't support that.
Yeah, this is why there are upgrade tests that upgrade the node, but not the master, upgrade the master, but not the nodes, that sort of stuff.
So if there's new compatibility
version of the client do you use to talk to the master when you run tests? There's other configurations. Sorry, you were saying, Aish?
Sorry, the video just froze there. So if there are new compatibility, like backward compatibility concerns and stuff like that, or if support changes, is the document that Jordan putting up, is that going to be the one stop to go on a B?
I would like the answer to be no, just for the reason that it's under K website. I would prefer the website to pull from somewhere else. Like we've got deprecation policy in the versioning document that Aaron linked off in, it is the both, yeah, K community. Like I feel like K community should be the canonical source of information in that regard. But then if we do that, we need to have a machine convertible way probably to have it tracked on website or something. It's again, the question of where do we put information? How do we keep it up to date? How do we make sure people look at it?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, down under design proposals and with a particular Git SHA. Yeah, just check out
master.
Yeah. Oh, is it on master? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because there was one that was there that I can't find that I used to reference a year ago that went somewhere else.
Mm.
And that I was trolling. I spent a half hour yesterday. I checked out a couple of locations of K community last fall and could not find this document that I vividly remember. But yeah, it's going to improve. So we have also we've changed up the meeting. I think in the past we've had this meeting set for an hour, but it's currently set for 45 minutes just to make a little more ability for people to like have a drink of water or go to the bathroom and things in their day. So we've got 10 minutes left. I guess I want to move on. Nico, you had something you want to talk about on decisions.
Yeah, this is mostly related to the discussion with milestones previously, very related. It's sort of the same subject of, especially when it comes to restricting and filtering issues down in code slush and code freeze, like generally the balance between strict requirements and nuanced scenarios of what goes in, what goes out. For example, reflecting on my recent experience as bug triage, like the handbook of the role had some inconsistencies and it created some miscommunications, etc. I think generally putting down guidelines overall in the process and trying to follow those with some open windows for discussions between also SIG owners and teams, etc. So yeah, this is overall the subject.
Yeah, I definitely want to see again that we think about living documents, so constantly upgrading the role handbooks, but then also bubbling some of that up, maybe the wording to make sure that each of them has something sprinkled in it around. These are guidelines, it's still pragmatic. Talk to the release lead and your peer leads to sort things out. I also really like the idea of having some sort of examples, like in such and such release, we ran into this problem. Here's how we thought and rationalized our way through it to give some guidance there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mentioned this in even Slack yesterday. I think this is where the shadow training and then the shadow having to also vet it and make some relevant updates to the doc before they become the lead will also really help, because that way, if they are the ones who are going to be taking up the role and running with it, then they are on board with the rule books as well. But yeah, I agree with Nico that a lot of those decisions are just made on a case-by-case basis. And then, sometimes people disagree on what's the criticality for a specific release. So I'm not sure as to how to clearly lay them down versus like having to play it by the ear for the release.
There used to be like paragraph long descriptions of what the different priority labels meant. I felt like people kind of glazed over those, so I tried to shorten them a little bit. So it's, like, is it critical? Is it urgent? Think about that for a second. Is this the top drop everything priority? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder why like the community went along with dropping numerical labels from priorities, but part of it was to put implicit meaning in those labels. So critical and urgent are two like pretty strong words, and then important soon is like it's important and we're doing it soon for like this release. And then I tried to clean up the community's use of kind labels so that we could all agree on the canonical set of like 7 plus or 2, since that seems to be the magic number where you can carry all that in your head. But yeah, all of the like human squiggly, squishy discussion kind of comes in are you really sure you want this in this milestone, yes or no? And like, I have no idea how many of those conversations have been going on. I've been a little out of it lately.
There's always a bunch every code freeze, but there's no way to do it except on a case-by-case basis, because there's always a whole bunch of different factors going on, right? Like, oh, yeah, we need to do this because it's breaking this test, but that requires implementing an API change that we haven't tested and affects this other component. And, trying to decide, there's no way to come up with a general set of rules that would allow you to decide on all of those cases.
I will say one of the plus or minus things here is we initially had, for a little while, we had a bot that was going through and auto-nagging issues that didn't have the appropriate labels applied. And that effectively blew up everybody's inboxes and was ignored. I think one of the things we have learned, for better or for worse, largely thanks to the efforts of folks like Aish or Guinevere or Josh, is that an actual human being going and poking somebody gets far more reception than anything else. As manual as that is, it seems to be the one thing that people pay attention to and get as a signal that, like, oh, right, somebody's actually looking at this. I should probably do something now. So that's unfortunately why, as clear cut as we can try to make the labels, there does often need to be some kind of periodic discussion or reminder.
I think, at least from my experience, just the ones that I really struggle making a call is, oh, but I know it's freeze, but it's a very simple change, and the PR is already in review. It's very close. Those are the things people tend to use to get things in during freeze, where then I have to revert and say, no, it's only if it's super critical and urgent. So it does come across as being like, oh, you're not being flexible, mainly because it's a simple change. But then I struggle with then what yardstick I should be using, a similar yardstick that I should be using across all issues. So, yeah.
So I captured some of that in the minutes. Should we move on, use the last 5 minutes for discussing the 114 release team? I know a lot of people were here for that. So in the agenda, there's 3 issues linked. The first one, 372, basically a placeholder, I believe, at this point. So the PR, oh no, I'm looking at the wrong one. Okay, so PR 377, addressing that issue. As it stands, it's only got a couple names listed, but the issue has a bunch of people saying, hey, I would like to.
Do we want to do the leads first, or Josh, do you have any other ideas? How do you want to do this?
And Aaron, I think it is a significant voice in it as well.
So I think Stephen's intent was to fill out the leads first, and then we can do shadows. I would also say, I'm really only going to feel comfortable being a lead if I have a shadow to go along with me. History has taught me that random things can eat up my attention from time to time, and I need somebody that I can rely on to help with communication, for sure. If it's just me, I'm not sure that it would be fair to the community for me and me alone to shoulder that burden, because I don't think I would do a great job.
Do you have anyone in mind? Have you heard from anybody?
I honestly I'd forgotten this process was going on right now. I hadn't actually planned on getting back to the community until my brain understood which time zone it was in. So I haven't put a lot of thought into it. You can kind of consider this a call if anybody here is super interested in it. Otherwise, I can start poking around and see if I can come up with anybody. But just since I hadn't replied on the issue or anything, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, well, I would think the obvious pool for release lead shadow would be the pool of current section leads and shadows. So everybody who's currently on the release team or was maybe on the 112 release team and hasn't moved up since then.
Yeah, I just told Aaron that this is happening today. Sorry to have. Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying in terms of putting out a call.
Yeah, Ian, you can expect me to get more vocal about this after Thanksgiving for sure. I just thought I'd share that now.
That makes sense.
By the way, on bug triage, my shadows weren't participating too much, and I'm not sure about nominating someone from my team. So what happens in that situation? Is it previous leads that might come back, or previous release team members to get the role, or I have to do it again?
I think technically the documentation says you're responsible for handing it over, but no, we are collaborative, and we try to figure out what the right path forward is. I mean, certainly if you're wanting to, and this is one of the things that hasn't been clear maybe at times, that there is no mandate that you must move on after one quarter, and a number of us really want to see more continuity, less immediate churn every 3 months.
Yeah, we did continue quite a few folks from 112 to 113 as well.
Yeah, your vote is the strongest since you've served in this role before. Maybe you have a better idea of who you think is qualified for this role. But if you find you're not able to fill it and aren't interested in continuing to staff it yourself, we can work with that and find somebody.
Yeah, I might continue on it.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
So do we want to?
So the other lead roles that are currently in the PR are missing. So if Nico's open to remaining, then we've still got, well, and has anybody heard if Caitlin is not interested? Generally, she's been interested in remaining on communications.
In the issue, Caitlin said she is nominating Natasha Woods.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And she would like to shadow and help out.
Okay.
And then
and is Cole, what are your thoughts? Are you on mute, or actually there's
I know that Amit said that he was maybe interested in doing test infra. He's shadowed Cole for a little bit.
Yeah.
He's not somebody I could go like poke in my office, but that's okay because I could poke him for me.
And he's right here.
Yeah, it's fine. It's totally fine.
Okay, I don't know if Cole's trying to talk in Zoom. I'm not seeing a microphone next to his name, but maybe then based on what y'all are saying, he was just gonna nominate Amit there.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds like that.
Now,
okay.
Forever hold your peace, Cole.
And Josh on CI Signal.
Yeah, so we had a discussion because I have the advantage of having 2 qualified shadows. And after talking about it, Maria wants to step up to be the CI Signal lead for next cycle.
Cool.
Morton will probably continue as a shadow for a second cycle, which means he'll probably be lead for 115.
Okay. So
I'll add that as a comment to the issue. So we'll have that recorded.
Maybe actually note it on PR 377.
Oh, where's that? Dang
it.
Okay, I was looking at the issue here.
So we've got a set of initial bits of information, but if we can fill in the leads in the PR, then that allows us to start focusing the conversation.
Okay.
Then the one that would remain at that point is patch management, and I'm hoping, so I still need to talk to Alexandra about this. We're going to start meeting regularly the next couple of weeks to formalize what we're thinking, and then, but what we kind of discussed was that we would act as a team of 2 for 113, and during the initial months of that, because the patch release managers for 114 aren't needed till 4 months from now, that we could sort of build out maybe and mentor a few more people, and by the end of 114 sort of have established a team that then carries that forward for the supported branches as opposed to one person on each. But what do folks think about that?
Sure. We had a bunch of people volunteer to help with patch management actually on the thread.
Yeah, I've had a bunch of people ping me who said, if this is a team, I'd like to get involved and be mentored and figure out how I can be participating in that team. Pretty much everybody is like, I can't just do it, I can't own it. And I think especially when people think about owning that for 9 months, it's a hard commitment. So I'm really enthused by the number of people who've expressed interest in participating if it's a team.
By the way, I read that in a comment that patch release team will be directly involved with release engineering, which I haven't found anything about that.
Yeah, so that's kind of a comment from Steven. Like, there's this bigger picture of what does the build and release look like, and what are our artifacts, and what are we doing where and why, and it dovetails into the questions of support. But I think that's a long range discussion about doing better around all of that and having a more sustainable team. But I think regardless of where that's going, patch management is something that we have to do today. Well, we are a bit over, and I promised people time to go to the bathroom and have a drink of water or whatnot. So if folks can update the PR 377 with the nominations for leads, then we can iterate over the coming weeks on shadows and try and chase down a specific shadow for Aaron as well on lead.
So I proposed a new process for selecting shadows.
Yes, that is actually listed there, and we're kind of out of time to talk about, but I actually think that's really important that we discuss that and clarify that. In the past, shadows have sort of been like volunteered, and especially in the last couple cycles, Stephen was like, okay, you're the shadow. But I really believe, Josh and I, we talked about this last week, we need to have a solid conversation between leads and prospective shadows. And this isn't a job interview. I think some people got hung up on like the term, like we should interview the prospective shadows. This is just about having a conversation, because this is a mentor-mentee relationship. What are the time commitments? What are the role expectations? Have you read the handbook? What are your thoughts? Do you think you can do this? Are you willing to commit for the time, duration, and the number of hours a week and those sorts of things, so that we can make this successful and you can successfully learn? And I do think that that's really important for us to do, and that should lead to a higher response rate, or a higher activity rate. Like Nico was saying, his shadows didn't end up being particularly active.
Yeah, well, and some of it actually comes down to mechanics. Like, I'll tell you, for CI Signal, I had 4 shadows volunteering. I know I could only reasonably mentor 2 people. And out of those shadow volunteers, I had 1 in Europe and 1 in China. And since I'm in California, there's just no way I could make that work. And so I had to disqualify either the European or the Chinese person, and ask them to re-volunteer for 114. So, but I'm saying if we adopt that process, then this team, the SIG release meeting, would not be involved in picking shadows. The shadow would be picked by the section lead together with the overall release lead.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. What do others think?
I think that's completely reasonable, and credits to Josh especially for piloting this for CI in 113, and he's had a really thriving shadow team. And then Maria graduating to become a lead is a sign of that. So I agree it shouldn't be too restrictive, but basic questionnaire and having the dialogue with the lead is definitely useful. And it's also critical before they get signed on as shadows, I feel.
Okay, well, I encourage folks to comment then on the issue, and I'm in favor of it. So, like, I think others have expressed that as well. I think that's a good path forward. Let's try and do that. Well,
My only counterpoint might be that I think the time expectations, time commitment would be a great thing to have written down. To sort of see all of that up front. You'll find I tend to be the guy who always advocates for less process and less human interaction, although I continually do espouse the need for humans to interact. I like machines to do the boring stuff. So, and sometimes I worry about the sheer, like on the one hand, I worry about the sheer volume of humans and process that this team has grown. On the other, this is one of the few groups of people who are actually consistently focused on mentorship as a responsibility of your role. which is generally the way it works in most companies that I've worked at. As you grow, you bring up others with you. I think it should be no different in the contributor ladder. So kudos to y'all for thinking about that when I think few other SIGs do. Or at least have documented processes for it that I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will say part of this, so there's a questionnaire draft in the issue. And as part of the questionnaire draft, obviously, whoever's the lead would have to be figuring out, hey, what's the approximate time commitment for this? And I think copying that information into the release handbook, if it's not already there, which it is in a few of the handbooks, but probably not most of them, would be really good.
Yeah.
So Aaron, are you saying that we can just assign you a shadow and you'll accept them?
Oh, yeah, totally. Unless I scare them off first.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, I'm certainly happy to have the conversation, for sure. I guess I'll have to actually go read the release lead playbook now and figure out what it is I'm supposed to be doing.
Hopefully it's all fairly familiar at this point. But
yeah. But like, this was the reason I wrote down I started the CI Signal playbook in the first place. When I served that role, I realized like nobody writes down what they do or how they do it. And the only way I get myself out of this mess is if I do that so that I can then hand it off to somebody else.
Yep. And that's, I think, a prerequisite for them to not being completely scared of the prospect, to be able to read it and rationalize like, hey, I could do that. That's what sucked me in.
Right.
All right, we're definitely up against the top of the hour, so I encourage folks to comment on those issues there, and the things that we didn't cover, I'll bump up to the next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks' time, just before KubeCon, and just after the release, what's going out on time, right?
Knock on wood. We'll see.
Right, we have hopes. We have hopes. CI Signal is almost green, so.
That is the Kubernetes green, almost green.
Almost green. Chartreuse.
Chartreuse.
Yeah.
Chartreuse.
You
know, oh my God, I just realized what gift I'm getting the CI Signal team members.
Oh, all right.
You're having a mini
calling
team.
my name on it, or calling
All
my
right.
name. I have to go.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining. Have a great day.